All right, listeners, buckle up, because today we're diving deep into the world of storytelling with the one and only Gregg Hurwitz.
And let me tell you, this isn't your average writing workshop. This is about unearthing the raw materials that make a thriller tick.
We're talking myth, personal demons, and the kind of twists that make Hitchcock proud.
We're breaking down how Gregg went from a kid obsessed with suspense stories
Yeah, you heard that. No TV, just Alfred Hitchcock and Red Sox games.
to a master storyteller who weaves those influences into every page.
It all started with a box of crayons and a head full of imagination.
See, even back then, Gregg was creating his own worlds, his own mysteries. He even illustrated them himself.
Imagine that. No iPads, no fancy writing software.
Just pure, unadulterated creativity pouring out.
It really makes you think, what were those early stories like?
What kind of mysteries was he conjuring up?
And how did those early experiments shape the writer he is today?
Get ready for some serious inspiration because we're about to uncover the answers.
And trust me, you don't want to miss this. We're talking about those formative experiences, those pivotal moments that light the fire for a lifelong passion.
It's like tracing those creative threads all the way back to their source.
And speaking of sources, we can't forget the master of horror himself, Stephen King. Turns out he had a pretty big impact on young Gregg.
Oh, absolutely. Who wasn't terrified, but also completely captivated by King's stories?
I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
And Gregg talks about this one experience reading Salem's Lot and how it
Just sent shivers down his spine. Even as an adult, those images, those emotions, they stuck with him.
And that's what's so fascinating about King, right? That ability to tap into our deepest fears, our primal instinct.
And make them feel so real, so visceral.
But here's the thing. It's not just about the author's words on the page. Gregg believes there's this unspoken agreement between the writer and the reader.
This kind of shared experience where the reader brings their own baggage, their own fears and memories.
And uses them to fill in the gaps, to amplify those emotions.
Exactly. It's like the author provides the framework, the skeleton of the story.
And then the reader's imagination takes over, fleshing it out with their own personal brand of terror.
Which brings us to one of my favorite parts of the conversation, the joints story.
Oh, man. This one is a masterclass in suspense. And the best part, it hinges on a single word.
Just one word, but the implications, the possibilities are absolutely chilling.
Okay, so picture this. A home invasion, a terrified couple tied up, and this hulking figure standing over them with a heavy bag of tools.
And when they ask him what he's planning to do, he just utters one word. Joints.
And that's it. Hurwitz ends the scene right there.
Leaving the reader hanging, their minds racing with all the gruesome possibilities.
See, he doesn't need to describe the violence, the blood, the gore. That single word, joints, is far more effective because it taps into our primal fears.
It's like that saying, the monster you don't see is always the scariest.
Absolutely. Our imaginations are far more adept at conjuring up those terrifying images than any author could ever be.
Which begs the question, where do these bone-chilling ideas come from?
It's the question every aspiring writer wants the answer to. Is there some secret formula, some magic well of inspiration?
You might be surprised to hear that for Hurwitz, it's not about waiting for a bolt of lightning to strike. It's much more about hard work, dedication, and embracing the messy process.
Yeah, he talks about the vomit draft, which sounds pretty unpleasant, but
It's actually quite liberating. It's that first draft where you just let it all out, no judgment, no self-editing.
it's about silencing that inner critic, that voice that says, this is garbage, stop now.
Because sometimes buried within that mess, within those jumbled sentences and half-baked ideas,
Lies the seed of a truly great story.
it's like giving yourself permission to suck.
Frankly, you can't edit a blank page.
Exactly. But here's where the real magic happens. It's in the rewriting, the refining, the chiseling away at those rough edges until...
Unearth the story worth telling.
Precisely. But even with all the hard work and dedication in the world, there's this other element that Hurwitz brings up.
Oh yeah, he says you can't talk about storytelling without talking about myth.
No, I know what you're thinking, myth. Ancient Greece, gods and monsters, that kind of thing.
And you're not wrong, but Hurwitz takes it a step further. He's a student of Carl Jung, and he believes that storytelling itself, it's not just entertainment.
It's hardwired into our DNA. It's how we make sense of the world, how we connect with each other.
It's like those stories, those myths, they're not just ancient history.
They're happening all around us every day.
And sometimes we're living them without even realizing it.
Exactly. It's like those universal themes, those archetypes, they transcend time and culture.
The hero's journey, the battle between good and evil, the search for meaning. These are stories that have resonated with people for centuries.
And they still speak to something deep within us, something primal, something undeniably human.
It's mind-blowing when you think about it.
It really is. Even if you went to a remote village, untouched by modern media,
You'd still find those core narratives woven into their storytelling.
it's this shared language, this universal understanding that connects us all.
And Hurwitz, he gets that. He understands that to write a story that truly resonates,
You have to tap into those universal truths, those shared experiences that make us human.
he even takes it a step further, using his writing as a way to navigate his own life.
Oh, I love that. He said, there's this quote from William James that he really connects with. Act like the person you want to be.
And when he's struggling with something, he asks himself, if I were writing this character, how would I have them handle this situation?
It's like using those fictional scenarios as a training ground for real life.
I love that. And it makes you realize that those mythical patterns, those archetypes, they're not just confined to books and movies.
They're woven into the very fabric of our lives.
Which brings us to another one of those classic narratives. The hunt, the pursuit, the chase, that primal instinct to seek and discover.
Ah, yes, the thrill of the chase. It's a tale as old as time.
And Hurwitz, he's a master of weaving this narrative into his work. His characters, they're not just chasing down bad guys. They're on these quests for truth, for justice.
For a sense of order in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable.
He calls it undeceiving. It's this process of peeling back the layers of illusion to reveal the truth beneath.
And often that journey of undeception is mirrored in the characters themselves, right?
Oh, absolutely. They might start off with one perception of themselves, of the world, but through their experiences.
They're forced to confront their own flaws, their blind spots, their own internal darkness.
And those flaws, those imperfections, they're often what make them so relatable, so human.
Exactly. We're drawn to characters who stumble, who fall, who make mistakes, because it reminds us that we're all just trying to figure things out as we go.
Nobody's perfect. And those imperfections, those vulnerabilities,
They're often the catalyst for the most compelling stories.
they're the cracks that let the light in.
Beautifully said. They create those high-stakes situations, those moments of truth, where a character is forced to dig deep and decide who they really are.
And speaking of details that bring those characters to life, there's this one recurring element in Hurwitz's books that I just can't get enough of.
You're talking about the dogs, aren't you?
You know it.
Oh.
Specifically, those Rhodesian Ridgebacks. He even dedicates one of his books to all Rhodesian Ridgebacks, none of whom were harmed in the writing of this book.
It's hilarious, but it also speaks to his love for these animals and for those specific details that ground a story in reality.
And it's not just a random detail, right? Those dogs were originally bred to hunt lions.
Exactly. They're known for their tracking skills, their loyalty, their courage in the face of danger.
Sounds familiar, right? It's like he's drawing a parallel between the physical hunt of the Ridgeback and the metaphorical hunts that his characters go on.
And I love how he uses those details, those nods to the real world, to create this sense of authenticity, even in the most fantastical stories.
Absolutely. But there's this other side of storytelling that we haven't quite touched on yet. It's the why. Why tell stories in the first place, especially stories that delve into the darker aspects of human nature?
It's a question that's been debated for centuries.
Should art provide an escape from reality, or should it hold up a mirror, forcing us to confront those uncomfortable truths?
And I'm curious, where do you think Hurwitz lands on this?
He seems to approach it from a less is more kind of vibe. He's
Mhm.
not necessarily setting out to answer those big philosophical questions.
More like he's drawn to stories that explore those complexities, the gray areas where good and evil aren't always so black and white.
And that's what makes his work so compelling, right?
Yeah.
He's not afraid to challenge our perceptions, to make us question our own assumptions about the world.
Exactly. It's not about providing easy answers. It's about sparking those conversations, those moments of introspection that make us think critically about ourselves and the world around us.
Okay, but enough about the bigger picture for now. Let's dive back into some specific examples of how Hurwitz uses myth and symbolism to add depth to his stories.
I'm all for it. Give me the good stuff.
One that immediately comes to mind is the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur.
Yes, the classic tale of venturing into the labyrinth, facing your fears, and hopefully emerging transformed.
And echoes of that in so many of Hurwitz's books. His characters are constantly descending into those metaphorical labyrinths.
Whether it's the dark underbelly of a criminal organization or the labyrinthine corridors of their own minds.
They're forced to confront their demons,
Yeah.
to make those tough choices that reveal their true character.
And just like Theseus emerged victorious, Hurwitz's characters often find a way to overcome those challenges, but not without sacrifice.
They're forever changed by the experience.
It's like that saying, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek.
And sometimes that treasure is a deeper understanding of ourselves.
Exactly. But here's the thing I love about Hurwitz. He's not afraid to poke fun at those classic archetypes, even as he's using them.
Oh, for sure. Like that scene in The Last Orphan where a character literally calls Evan Smoke an archetype to his face.
I loved that. It's like he's winking at the reader saying, yeah, I know the rules, but I'm also going to have a little fun with them.
And it works because he's so good at what he does.
Yeah.
He understands those archetypes, those tropes so well that he can subvert our expectations without sacrificing the integrity of the story.
It's like he's saying, yes, these archetypes exist, but they're not set in stone.
We can play with them, we can deconstruct them, we can breathe new life into them.
Exactly. And that, my friend, is the mark of a true storyteller.
Someone who understands the rules of the game well enough to break them.
And in doing so, creates something truly original, something truly unforgettable. And it makes me think of something else Hurwitz talked about.
Oh yeah, he drew this fascinating parallel between Picasso and storytelling.
The idea that even the most innovative artists, those who break the mold, they often have a deep understanding of the fundamentals.
He said that Picasso was a master of realism before he revolutionized the art world with his abstract painting.
He had to understand the rules of perspective, of light and shadow, of human anatomy, before he could deconstruct them.
It's like learning the scales before you can improvise a jazz solo.
Exactly. And just as Picasso drew inspiration from the masters who came before him, so too does Hurwitz draw on that rich history of storytelling.
Oh, absolutely. And one of his biggest influences.
Shakespeare.
The master of language, the architect of human drama.
He talks about how Shakespeare wasn't afraid to borrow from history, to adapt existing stories, even to rework his own plays. He even mentions how The Merchant of Venice was likely inspired by an earlier play called The Jew of Malta, which is fascinating, right? Because it shows how those creative threads, those ideas and themes, they weave their way through history, inspiring new generations of artists.
And it reminds us that even the greatest storytellers are constantly learning, evolving their craft.
Building upon the foundation laid by those who came before. And just as Shakespeare drew from Plutarch, today's thriller writers find inspiration in the works of Chandler Hammett.
And of course, Gregg Hurwitz. But for all this talk of myth and history and highfalutin literary comparison,
It's those small, those specific details that really bring a story to life.
you're telling me. And
Yeah.
nobody does details quite like Hurwitz.
I know. Remember when we were talking about Evan Smoke's penchant for vodka?
Oh yeah, it seems like such a small thing.
But it speaks volumes about his character.
It's like that line in The Last Orphan where he compares vodka to his own life. He says base elements put through a rigorous process, distilled and filtered until the result was transformed into its purest essence.
It's perfect. It speaks to his need for control, for order, for stripping away all the extraneous bullshit to get to the heart of the matter.
Exactly. And when you consider his background, it all makes sense. The precision, the control, it's all there.
It's every detail, no matter how small, has been carefully chosen to reveal something deeper about his character.
And that's the beauty of it, right? Those small details, they create this sense of authenticity.
They draw us in, make us believe in the reality of the world the author has created.
Even if that world is populated by assassins and spies and international conspiracies.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, it's those human truths, those relatable details that make a story truly resonate. But sometimes those details, those truths, they come at a cost.
You're talking about those dark places a writer has to go to, those uncomfortable truths they have to confront.
Exactly. Because to write about the complexities of human nature, sometimes you have to get your hands a little dirty.
He told this one story about having to write the backstory for a real-life terrorist.
Oh, gosh, yeah, that one was heavy.
And he said it was one of the hardest things he's ever had to do as a writer,
Yeah.
to really get inside the head of someone capable of such evil.
To understand their motivations, their justifications, without condoning their actions.
It's about empathy, even for the most unsympathetic characters. Because to truly understand the darkness, you have to be willing to look it in the eye.
And that takes courage, not just for a writer, but for all of us.
Because we all encounter those dark corners of human nature at some point in our lives.
Whether it's in the news, in our own communities, or even within ourselves.
And it's in those moments when we're faced with something truly difficult to comprehend that we have a choice.
We can turn away or we can lean in.
We can choose to listen, to empathize, to try to understand, even if it makes us uncomfortable.
Because that's how we bridge the divides. That's how we build a more compassionate world.
It's about finding those glimmers of hope in the darkness, those moments of grace that remind us that even in the darkest of times, we're not alone.
Absolutely. It's about those moments of connection, those reminders that even in the midst of chaos, there's still beauty to be found.
And sometimes that beauty comes from the most unexpected places. Like, who knew Evan Smoke's love for vodka could be so profound?
It's not just about the drink itself, it's about what it represents. That
Yeah.
need for clarity, for purity, for stripping away the noise of the world to find the essence of things.
It's like that line of his base elements put through a rigorous process, distilled and filtered, until the result is transformed into its purest essence.
Exactly. It speaks to something deeper than just a taste preference. It's about a philosophy of life, a way of moving through the world with intention, with purpose.
And that's what makes those small details so powerful. They're not just random quirks. They're carefully chosen to reflect something deeper about the character, their motivations, their desires.
It's like those details, those seemingly insignificant choices. They become these little windows into the soul. And when they're done well, they can elevate a story from entertaining to truly unforgettable.
Absolutely. They draw us in, make us believe in the reality of those characters, even if they exist in a world of spies and assassins and international conspiracies.
Because at the end of the day, what we're really craving are those human truths, those moments of recognition that make us feel seen, understood, connected.
Exactly. It's like that saying, the devil's in the details. But in this case, it's the humanity, the heart of the story that shines through.
And that attention to detail, that commitment to finding those moments of truth, that's what sets Hurwitz apart as a writer.
Absolutely. But it's not just about the quiet moments, the introspection. He's also a master of action, of those heart-pounding scenes that keep you on the edge of your seat.
Oh, for sure. And you'd think those action sequences are all about the adrenaline, the visceral thrill. But Hurwitz has this great philosophy about writing action.
Oh yeah, he says, every fight scene should have something to do with character.
Exactly. It's not just about who throws the punch or who lands the knockout blow. It's about using that action to reveal something deeper about the characters involved.
So it's not just physical, it's emotional too.
Exactly. It's about their motivations, their fears, their vulnerabilities, everything that's at stake in that moment.
It's like those external battles, those physical confrontations. They mirror those internal struggles, those deeper conflicts that are raging within the characters.
And when that's done well, it creates this incredible tension, this sense of anticipation that keeps you hooked. You're not just watching a fight. You're invested in the outcome because you understand what it means for those characters.
And that's what we keep coming back to, right? Whether we're talking about myth or character flaws or even a perfectly crafted vodka martini, it's all about tapping into those universal truths of the human experience.
Exactly. It's about finding those echoes of ourselves in the stories we consume, those moments of recognition that remind us that we're not alone in our struggles, our triumphs, our search for meaning in a sometimes chaotic world.
And that ultimately is the power of storytelling. It's a way to connect with others, to build empathy, to explore the complexities of human nature, and hopefully to emerge from the experience a little bit wiser, a little bit more compassionate, and a little bit more prepared to face whatever challenges life throws our way.
So the next time you find yourself drawn into a story, pay attention to those details, those moments of truth, those echoes of ancient myths that continue to shape the way we see ourselves and the world around us.
Because those stories, they have the power to transform us, to connect us, and to remind us that even in the darkest of times, there's always hope, there's always growth, and there's always the potential for a damn good story.